I think long-term political stability in Hong Kong is going to be a function of letting people vote and express their grievances peacefully and having authorities there respond to those. It's not going to be a function of thousands of rounds of tear gas and, fairly direct threats from Beijing that protests won't be tolerated.
The protests, as we're seeing, are far from diminishing. We're now seeing civil servants taking part in this general strike. That certainly is not going to go down too well with Chinese authorities, is it?
Of course not. Beijing doesn't want anybody protesting about anything, but I think it's, in a way, flip it around. And the more important point is that, 2 months ago or even a couple of years ago, the kinds of people who would go out and publicly protest was somewhat limited. And there was a popular and now clearly not true idea that people in Hong Kong didn't care about their rights. And I think what we've seen over the last 9 weeks is, in fact, that a far broader cross-section of people has been galvanized to go out and say, no, actually, we really do care about this. We want the local authorities to respond to our concerns, whether those are economic, whether they're about the extradition law, whether it's about universal suffrage. But I think the catalyzation of people in Hong Kong is not going to go away anytime soon.
So what has changed in the last few years?
Well, I think you've seen particularly a younger generation of activists who I think both Hong Kong and Beijing authorities calculated would be quiescent, would go along with one country, two systems as Beijing envisioned that. I think those authorities also badly miscalculated about whether pro-Beijing politicians in Hong Kong would garner enough support longer term through these very limited channels of voting. And they certainly didn't expect that a rather broader cross-section of people would come out to protest and assume that it would be a sort of narrow, confinable group of people. And they're clearly wrong about that. And I think Beijing doesn't quite know what to do in these circumstances because its reflexes are to, simply crush or co-opt dissent. And I think Hong Kong people are making pretty clear that those are not palatable or acceptable options.
Given what you've been saying, how long can one country, two systems policy actually last?
Well, I think Beijing has to make some decisions about just how much reputational and actual cost it's willing to bear, but also, how much it could still gain in simply respecting the agreement that's on paper. It's extraordinary how many people have made clear in Hong Kong over the last couple of weeks that they don't necessarily object to the one country, two systems formulation as long as that's actually respected in practice. I think if Beijing backed off on things like, proposed legislation that encroaches on rights, or, and frankly, if Hong Kong authorities actually stepped up to represent Hong Kong people's interests, even in matters that don't really have much to do with Beijing, this could play out very differently.